Hey everyone, back again for another edition of That's Our Two Satoshis Live, where we talk about everything happening in the crypto and digital asset markets. For those who like to read as well as listen, you can obviously go to our website, ar.ca/blog, and read the weekly blog, That's Our Two Satoshis. I'm Jeff Dorman, Chief Investment Officer of ARCA, and I am joined by Alex Thorn, who is the head of global research at Galaxy Digital, someone who I've known for a long time, but I don't think we've ever actually done a pod or a show today, before. So really thrilled to have you here, Alex.
Jeff.
Thanks
For
joining.
having me. I'm a big fan of your two sats. Been reading it for a long time and happy to be on the stream.
Well, you should be a fan of it because I'd say I steal half of it from your weekly write-up. For those who don't get it, Galaxy Digital every Friday sends out a really good recap highlighting three things that are happening in the digital asset market as well. You wouldn't know it. Alex and I are actually at the same conference right now out in Austin, Texas, Consensus, but he's doing it from the comforts of his own hotel room, whereas I am in some sort of a tiki bar in between meetings here. But all right, Alex, let's get going here. It's been a cool week for digital assets. I titled the write-up this week that this is the most important week in digital assets history. And even as I was saying that to people, part of my back of my mind, I was like, you know what, maybe this actually isn't, maybe I'm exaggerating. And then I thought about it more. I'm like, no, you know what, I'm actually right. This is, of all the cool things that have happened in the market, from successful ICOs to the Coinbase direct listing, Paul Tudor Jones calling Bitcoin the fastest horse, the rise of perpetual swaps and CryptoKitties and Facebook launching Libra and Uniswap airdrop, and you name it, all these awesome things have happened that have affected the capital markets. I don't think there was a week or a series of weeks that was as positively impactful as what we saw from the series of regulatory actions in the United States out of Washington.
I do agree. And we wrote, I guess it was 3 weeks ago now that maybe it was 2 or 3 weeks ago that the Senate voted to pass the SAB 121 overturn with 11 Democrats and 1 independent joining in the face of that White House veto threat. And we wrote then that the Senate rebukes the White House on SAB 121. And it felt that way, but it was also a little aspirational when we wrote that. We said it felt like the beginning of a sea change, but I could not have imagined how right we ended up being. I mean, I was sort of saying that it was a rebuke, saying that it felt like a political shift. But then, of course, the next Monday, 3 days later after that, the SEC apparently breaks radio silence and starts working on the ETH ETF. And then we have a whole cascade of presidential comments and the Fit 21 Act vote. And
yeah, I mean, I'll give you an actual timeline here. I mean, this is how much of a just complete 180 it was, right? I mean, for all intents and purposes, Washington hated crypto up until May 8th. And on May 8th, Trump stated, if you're in favor of crypto, you better vote for Trump. And those 11 words set off a 2-week just tizzy in Washington, where it led to May 16th, which you already talked about, the Senate voting to repeal SAB 121, which was an accounting measure that would have really damaged the way public companies and banks account for crypto. May 18th, you had the anti-crypto FDIC chair, Martin Grunberg, who stepped down. Not really crypto-related. It was for other reasons, sexual misconduct, but still very anti-crypto, vocal anti-crypto chairman of the FDIC stepping down. May 20th is when the great guys at Bloomberg Research on the ETF strategy side, Eric Balchunas and James Seifert, coming out and saying that we're upping our expectations for the Ethereum ETF approval from 25% to 75%. Again, this came out of nowhere. It was not that their original call was wrong per se. It's just that all this new information came out where Washington was like, uh-oh, we need to change some things here. And then, of course, May 21st, Trump piled on the pro-crypto stance by launching a website that accepted crypto donations. May 22nd, as you mentioned, the House passes Fit 21, which is going to be the first potentially positive regulation in the U.S. as it pertains to who actually has oversight, leaning towards the CFTC rather than the SEC. And then May 23rd was the main event when the SEC actually approved the 19B4 filings for the Ethereum ETFs. So just a whirlwind from a timeline standpoint. Again, considering 2 weeks ago, everything just looked dead in the U.S. as it pertained to crypto regulation.
15 days, really the whole perspective looks different. I mean, I'm still kind of pinching myself to, realize that it has actually happened. I think one of the most interesting and clearest ways that you can see the shift in the Democrats and White House's political strategy here is if you look at the first veto threat on the SAB 121 vote that from the Statement of Administration Policy has this explicit veto threat. And of course, the House votes for it anyway with 21 Democrats, and later the Senate with 11 Democrats and 1 independent. And if you read the text of that first veto threat, first of all, it has an explicit veto threat. If this comes to the president's desk, he will veto it. But also the language is hysterical, right? It's that this, removing the SEC's ability to have this staff accounting bulletin would cause financial instability. It would drastically harm, et cetera, et cetera. All these very hysterical words. And of course, remember that we're talking about a relatively arcane tax guidance from a weird part of the SEC that provides guidance and information to the public accounting firms, right? I mean, it does matter. It does cause Coinbase or other publicly traded companies who hold end clients cryptos to have to hold them on their balance sheet. And because of separate capital requirement rules for banks, many of them are public, they wouldn't be able to get involved at all. So it does matter, but it was a pretty small issue in the scheme of things. And yet the White House's statement was this, like, they're effectively saying it would be financial markets apocalypse if that thing were overturned. But then fast forward 2 weeks from then, and if you read the statement of administration policy leading into the FIT 21 Act, no explicit veto threat, of course, that we know, but also conciliatory language, right? And it almost seems like like 2 different people wrote those statements. And I wonder if, Senator Elizabeth Warren's former chief of staff, John Donnenberg, who works in the National Economic Council, maybe wrote the first one and not the second one. And in any case, if you compare those 2 statements, they are dramatically different. And of course, if you really hated crypto and you wanted to veto one of these 2 bills, you would obviously pick the FIT 21 Act, a much more sweeping, consequential piece of legislation than, merely rebuking the the staff accounting group of the SEC's, interpretation of arcane tax rules, right? So obviously a huge shift really has happened, whether it's a shift in policy long term by either party, whether the Republicans or Trump, follow through on their apparent now love of crypto, and his apparent love of crypto, remains to be seen. Whether this pivot in political strategy from the Democrats and the White House manifests itself in a more positive, longer term outlook for crypto, that remains to be seen. But it's undeniable that the political strategy has changed significantly.
Well, I think it's fair to say that the Democrats either consciously or subconsciously made one of the largest miscalculations ever. And what I mean by that is there's at least 50 to 100 million people in the United States who care about crypto in some sort of a positive way, right? Either they invest in it, or they're a developer building on it, or they just believe in freedom of money and assets and have some sort of a libertarian view. That's a lot of people who are pro crypto in some way. Then there's probably a good 2 to 250 million people who are just completely indifferent and don't care at all. And it wouldn't matter to them one way or another, other than a few jokes here and there about what's happening in crypto. But there's probably only maybe 10 or 20 people total who are so anti-crypto that they would actually vote on an anti-crypto stance. And when you just think about that, 50 to 100 million people like it, maybe 10 to 20 total really hate it enough to vote on it. It's just a complete miscalculation in terms of being as hostile and as negative they are, especially in an election year. And again, whether Trump follows through on all of it or not, he picked up on that. And just, again, by those 11 words saying a vote for crypto is a vote for Trump, he completely opened a can of worms for everybody on the Democratic side to reevaluate what their stance is, and probably some Republicans too. I mean, this is not necessarily completely bipartisan. It just, everybody had to rethink, wait a minute, am I going to lose voters by being anti-crypto? I'm certainly not going to gain any by being anti-crypto. And once you open that door, you start to get what Americans have wanted since the start of blockchain and digital assets, which is at least some progress. And, one of the things that I cited in the write-up on our website was a nice poll by Bitwise at the end of last year. And Bitwise obviously focuses more on ETFs and passive, so they're focused more on the RIA and FA market. But they cited that 64% of advisors cited regulatory uncertainty as a barrier to greater crypto adoption. And volatility was a distant second at 47%. I'm sure as well, like Galaxy deals also with FAs and RIAs, but also much deeper into pensions and endowments and other institutional investors. There's no question that regulatory uncertainty was the number one pushback that we've gotten for years. In fact, every other piece of pushback we've gotten has basically been debunked over the years, right? It's not as volatile as people think. There are real counterparties and custodians you can use. There are valuation techniques for a lot of the different assets. It's really only the regulatory uncertainty that has been this hang up that pretty much anytime an investor wanted to get off the phone with you, they can be like, well, we're not going to invest because of regulatory uncertainty. And I'm not sure that answer is valid anymore, just based on the progress alone.
It's definitely, that answer is degraded for sure. I mean, I think we still do lack the actual, FIT 21 isn't law, for example, but the path seems relatively set at this point for if this change in political strategy from the White House and perhaps the SEC. I mean, if that holds, then we're set to gain significant, I think, regulatory certainty over the next 12 to 18 months. The irony too is that this is, you don't have to FIT 21 as an example. This is not a handout to industry. Like, there's a lot in there. There's rules for issuers and exchanges and brokers and disclosure requirements and a variety of, I don't want to say not overly burdensome. I think that's why we like it. It's progressive. It's thoughtful. It creates a pathway for businesses like Galaxy, for example, to have clear defined rules and regulators and know who is the regulator when. That's what we need, but it's not a handout. But if you look across the world, in the UK, in Europe, in Dubai, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, these places have these types of progressive, comprehensive regulatory frameworks that both protect consumers and support innovation. So the US is really falling behind without, and that's just insane. I mean, in our quarterly crypto VC report that we do every quarter, just for Q1, again, this is not a surprise. It's always been this way, but it continues. Something like 45% of all of the capital invested in early stage crypto startups in Q1 went to startups headquartered in the United States, right? Like, we have pole position here. We just need not thwart it and lose it. And so I agree also with your assessment. I mean, who is getting elected or raising money being anti-crypto? It just doesn't make sense. It's a strange way to live your life, defining it by your opposition to something. Just don't use it. No one's forcing you. It's purely based on voluntarism, right? It's not we're not forcing it on you.
Yeah, you might win Jamie Dimon's vote and Nora Rubini's vote, but that's about it. You're not winning anyone else's
strange
vote.
I think that's really what's happened. There's a lot of money being raised by the crypto community to support pro crypto politicians. I think there are some Senate races that are very tight that could change control of the Senate, and I hope and I think that it's not just the arguments and the and the verbal speech and the quality of the legislation, but I think money also is speaking here. You can't, I don't think you get elected being against crypto, could actually only harm, but no one's giving you money because you're anti-crypto. I don't think I don't think that's a big fundraising tool.
Yeah. I think you hit that. You used the word progressive as it pertains to FIT 21, because again, this is not like the most positive, easiest bill in the world for crypto companies to adapt it. There's going to be a lot of changes to the bill before it ultimately becomes law, and it's going to be some onerous things as well. But I think, to your point, it was progressive, right? It's the first real positive step forward. And you can go back to the presidential election last year. If you remember, leading up to the election, there was a real fear that we wouldn't know who the winner was after the presidential election. And as a result, markets got killed in October. And then once there was a clear winner in Biden after the election, the equity market was up like 9% or 10%. Crypto was up like, I think, 20 or 30%. It almost didn't matter what the outcome was, as long as there was an outcome. Again, I'm talking purely from a capital market standpoint, not from other areas of business, but from a capital markets and investing standpoint. Investors hate uncertainty more than they hate bad outcomes, and the uncertainty has been the killer for crypto investment in the United States. And even if FIT 21 isn't perfect, the fact that it's progressing and the fact that there will be some clarity, that is way better. Investors can deal with bad outcomes. We've been dealing with bad outcomes, for hundreds of years. You know how to quantify, you know how to risk assess a bad outcome. What you can't risk assess is uncertainty. So again, I think the response from 4 years ago from both the equity market and the crypto markets of just, I don't really care who the winner is as long as there is a winner, is the same thing here in the US from a regulatory standpoint in crypto, which is, I don't really care what the answer is as long as there is an answer. And I think this is why I say it's the biggest week in crypto history from a capital market standpoint, because we are that much closer to getting
I totally agree.
Really.
I think it's long overdue. I do think no matter who wins this presidential election, even if Biden has another 4-year term, I think that the situation will materially improve regardless of who wins. Partly because I don't think it can get any worse than 22, 23 from the SEC. I mean, a whole range of issues that they've put forth on exchange definition that could ensnare a bunch of DeFi, just truly wild stuff, right? And I really don't think it could get worse than that. Everything points to it getting better. I think even, the 71 House Democrats that voted for FIT21, people remember that, right? They voted now for, and again, like we said, it's not a, and when I say progressive, I don't mean like the political left. I mean progressive versus regressive, right? The idea that it does move the ball forward. Whether or not it's perfect, it's a whole nother debate. I think it certainly isn't perfect, but there's plenty of good stuff in there. There's a pathway to launch a token in a compliant way with attendant disclosures, and investors have to disclose, and a whole bunch of stuff that you should have, right? That I think people have been calling for and pushing for years. I think anyway, there's a whole bunch of other good stuff in there. It's just about time, Jeff. I think America's ready for it. I think the political class has realized that we're not going away. The other thing I would say is, in addition to the regulatory uncertainty at the allocator level, I think the politicians too, people just thought we were dead. They thought we died after 2017, then shocked them and came back. Then after FTX collapsed, I think they thought Bitcoin would die. They thought cryptos would just go to zero and go away. And people were very surprised to see, Bitcoin rally from 16.5 to 70,000. And I think they finally, I don't know how many times we have to die and come back for them to finally realize that this thing is here to stay. It definitely is here to stay. So rather than try to regulate it or out of existence or create some sort of unenforceable prohibition, you've got to incorporate it into your country and your national regulatory framework. You just got to reckon with it.
For sure. What is already dead can never be killed. Look, I think many investors, as we said, have had, regulatory uncertainty as a reason to avoid digital assets for years. And I think that is just slowly being washed away. I think the next step is pretty soon investors are going to have to start making lists regarding why they need to own digital assets instead of the lists for why they don't. So again, I think this is a monumental week. Alex, I really appreciate you coming on to talk about this. Give the listeners and viewers, where can they reach you? Where can they learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. Love joining. And check us out, galaxy.com. Galaxy.com/research has a whole bunch of our written content. You go there, you can sign up for our newsletter that Jeff mentioned, listen to our podcast. We have 2 now, Galaxy Brains, my podcast, and then Christine Kim covers the Ethereum world in depth on her podcast, Infinite Jungle. So check us out. Yeah, galaxy.com/research.
That is great. I noticed I haven't been a guest on your show.
You got to get that. We got to get that book, Jeff. Invite. You're coming on.
Terrific. Well, Alex, I appreciate it. I know you got a hard stop. Thank you again for everyone watching here. That's our 2 Satoshis. We'll do it again next week. Usually we did it on a Wednesday this week. Usually it's on a Tuesday. The blog comes out on Monday. And again, make sure you reach out to Alex on Twitter or X, or sign up for his weekly write-ups because they're spectacular. So Alex, thanks again. Good seeing you, brother. And we will talk soon, hopefully with more and more positive
thanks,
developments.